is, what has kept you? What do you fear about Revelations? Why have you not studied it? What has kept you? A lot of people talk about they study the Bible, they read the Bible, but they don't read Daniel, they don't read Revelations, right? Has that been you?
It don't keep me from reading or studying it. What frustrates me is there's so many different interpretations of it.
Okay, one thing that we fear sometimes is different interpretations and different understandings that's in Revelations, right?
Of course, that's true of the whole Bible, but particularly in Revelation.
Yeah, the imagery, the images that we see, the images that are portrayed, I'm talking about me, and I'm sure some of you are in my same car that I'm driving, so we have a hard time in this day and time understanding imagery that's read there. And so we don't want to misinterpret it, and we don't want to misunderstand it. So one thing is that. Okay, what else? Just plain scary?
Yes, and I don't like to read scary books, but people watch TV shows and read scary books all the time.
I don't watch scary movies. I have never watched scary movies since I was a kid. I just don't do that. It scares me. Don't like it. So there's some of the imagery can be very scary. Some of the things that come out of it have that tendency to give us an uneasiness about it, which could be scary, so we fear that. Okay. What else?
One thing that has inspired me to read it is there are so many different ideas and stories out there about it. I was getting confused, so I started studying it. And it isn't the norm of what goes on in our everyday life with language, but it isn't that scary when you really sit down and study it.
Okay. We have a tendency as humans a lot of times, if we don't understand something, to just avoid it. We avoid those situations, we avoid those kind of things, don't we? Those conflicts or those... so we have a tendency to avoid some of the things that we can't quite understand or don't want to understand or don't understand. In verse 3 of chapter 1, what does he say? Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written. Okay? For the time is near is the last part of that. So right off the bat, it tells us that blessed is the person who studies Revelations or who reads it. And is that part. But because of the imagery a lot of times, or because of some of that, we'd have a tendency not to do that because we don't understand it as well. Now, I love the way that Devin's going through it, and I love the way what Randy talks about is we focus so much on the imagery, we forget the message so many times. And the message in Revelation is so simple. God has already won. You be a part of God, you have won. In the end, your promises are true. That's just the simpleness of it all. Right? But we get caught up in all this other stuff to where we even forget how simple this message can be. God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son to die for each one of us. Whoever believes in him shall not perish, right? How simple is that? But then we get conflicted. People misunderstand this and try to, and I think this has been expressed somewhat before, because of trying to, because of our own fear. They'll give us an explanation of it. Well, they'll try to tell us all about it. They'll try to, and we'll grasp sometimes this misinterpretation just because it's someone else is trying to lead us into that. So we need to do like you have talked about, is go in there with an open mind to study it, understanding that the Lord is going to try to be simple. Let me see here. Where did that go? Okay. One thing that the book of Revelations has tried to point out, that good will always triumph over evil. How do you think what is the picture in your mind, let me put it that way, of how the Lord wins in the end? What's the picture in your mind of how the Lord wins in the end? He's already won, okay. How does he win in your life? Let me ask you that. How do you think it's going to happen? No, how does the victory end up in your life? How does it end for you? Okay, she says if she obeys him, then she has nothing to fear. That's true. You've heard this said that I don't actually care what I am in heaven if I could be the janitor, just as long as I squeak in under the door, right? You've heard that? Now you quit shaking your head. You have heard that. Just as long as I make it, I don't care what I am. Has anybody ever thought that? You have? Okay. I know people have, because I've thought that. Just as long as I make it, it doesn't matter. There's fear in that statement. There's fear in that belief. Right? Fear that you might not make it, that I won't be good enough, that I won't be right enough, righteous enough. And maybe it's because of my background that I have those kinds of thoughts sometimes. And that's one of the things from my background that I have rejected, because it is a thought of fear instead of a thought of victory, of grace and love and mercy. Just as long as I barely get in, then it's good enough. Is that what Revelations is saying? No. Now there's cautions. You know, we just got through going through the 7 churches, you know, and talking about each one of those, and Devin led that sermon about their things that they should, and you know, we've got this imagery up here of the candle stands and stuff in the church and taken away, which could be imagery for each one of us, but there is a victory. It's already been won. Do we live like that's already been done? Or do we live like, just as long as I make it under the door, I'll be okay. How do you live that? If it's a victory already and it's already been won, how do you live it?
Walk with him. He promised that he would never leave us or forsake us. He said, if we believe, if we walk in the light, he tells us. I guess my background has given me confidence because when I was in my 30s, is when we were started being taught the truth. We left a denomination. And it was such a relief to hear the good and the positive things that there is hope. That you're not going to make it by the skin of your teeth. If you walk with him, you're going to make it. He's not this big bad man up there ready to zap you. He is there to love you and hold you and clean you.
And that's the imagery. You know, the imagery, he's trying to help us do everything possible for us to be in heaven with him. And then you have the imagery, he's doing everything possible to strain and everything possible to make sure he gets the right ones in there. Correct? Two different thoughts. I'm from the second thought, she's from the first thought. Where it's more difficult for us. We take the broad is the way that leads to destruction, right? And then we take that other term that says narrow is the way that leads to righteousness. How narrow is it? And if I'm in the narrow way, we live in fear that I'm going to fall off the narrow way as we go along. But that's not the imagery that he's talking about. That's not the imagery of fear that he's talking about in Revelations. He does say there's a possibility of that, but he says most of that, the fear that you have to overcome, is not the fear that I'm going to reject you, it's the fear that you're going to reject me and compromise, right? Are you going to compromise your faith? Are you going to fear the world more than you're going to love my grace? That's what the message he preaches to these churches, right? Don't compromise. Don't wear the mark of the beast, as he calls it, or the mark, just so you can do business. Just because you can fit in. Just so that your life is easier. We have never overtly in this country had to worry about that. We've had to covertly worry about that. You know, I've said in the class before when I was teaching full time, it was easy for me to reject something when it walked up there with a sign that said, "I am sin." We can all do that. We can see it, we can reject it. It's harder to reject that when it's one of those sneaky little lies that's being told, or this little lie, and then it's a little one and it's not really, and then next thing you know, you're farther away from God than you ever were, and you didn't even realize how you got there. Compromise. We are coming to a point in this country and in our faith where we're going to have to make a choice. We're going to be making choices. This argument of tolerance that permeates our culture at this point. Tolerance for what? Sounds good. It's a good argument. It's got all these right terms that go along with that. But tolerance of what? Is that a biblical argument? We make a statement, love the sinner, hate the sin, right? Will you be able to preach a message to someone and love them as Jesus loved them, but hate the sin that was in their life? Are we going to be able to do that? What if it publicly becomes a problem doing that? I know I've talked to Devin before, And he fears at some point, preaching up in the pulpits could be hate crimes. We're seeing that stuff. All ministers and all people that would preach about what is right and true in the Bible can be considered hate crimes. That's exactly what Revelation's talking about. Compromise. What are we going to compromise to? Are we going to water down the truth? Or are we going to preach the truth in love, as Jesus did, knowing that this world may attack us? May put you in prison. Ooh, who was put in prison before? All the apostles, right? Most of them, for preaching the truth. They preached the truth in love, but they preached it. They were put in prison for it. Many of the books of the Bible we're reading with Paul writing them, he was in prison more times than he wasn't for preaching the truth. I hope we have a lot of Pauls in here. I hope we have a lot of Pauls up there where the little kids are and all those. We need to model that behavior. Love is everything. Compromising the truth is not. Revelation teaches us that, especially. You've been taught the truth, but now you've strayed away from it. Why? We don't need to fear God. We don't need to fear Him. We need to fear the world more than what it can do, because it can take us away from what is true. Light can never coexist with darkness. Light can never coexist with darkness. How many times have we tried to make it coexist with darkness? How does blessed are the peacemakers fit into light can no coexist with darkness? We talked about the Beatitudes last time I was teaching up here, and we talked about that. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see God. How does a peacemaker not coexist with darkness? What does that mean? How do we make that live in our life? I'm asking a bunch of questions, aren't I? I don't know if I have all the answers. But these things are the things. I've got to be this, but I can't be that. And I can't let that rub off on this, or I'll be compromised. Hardest thing in there is talking about is usually with our family, and I've talked some about my family before, and about a sister that's been basically it's been 30 or 40 years I haven't seen her. She chose a different path, and she chose a path of darkness. And my dad, at that time, felt like that at that point that she could no longer be a part of our family because light and darkness cannot coexist. Now, does that mean we don't love her? Does that mean we don't care for her? We don't think about her? We don't pray about her and pray for her? No. But light and darkness cannot coexist, because ultimately darkness will overtake. To me, that's my example. It was not easy. I know it wasn't easy. I remember the tears and the heartache and the things that went on with it at that time. I think about her. I think about it now even. And but I understand the lack of tolerance that needed to exist. Sin could not exist. I went through this with my daughter, my oldest one, Rebecca. And we talked for a long time about the sin that was in her life. And that was one of the tough times with me and my wife. But we were together with it and told her that this is what's going to have to be, and this is how it would have to be. And praise God that she chose the correct path. And her life now is where it ought to be. And I give thanks for that every day. Light and darkness cannot coexist. Each one of you have been in a situation similar to this, I'm sure, with your families, or will be at some point, or with friends, with your work. It will happen to you at some point. If it's not already, it will again. Do not compromise the truth. Don't do it. God has promised you a great victory. He's already won the war, has been pointed out. But in your life, a personal victory will be. He promised you that, and He is faithful to His promise. Don't compromise. You rip your heart out, smash it flat, and you don't think you're going to live, but there's something better, and that's the promise that God has given each one of us. Truth and justice will always ultimately prevail. Is that true? Did the good guys ever win? Huh? Remember those cowboy movies? You could tell the good guys from the bad guys, depending on what color their hat was, right? Black or white. They made the distinction between light and darkness, just even in the movies. Now anymore, you can't tell who the bad guy is if you watch anything, or who the good guy is either. But ultimately, always, truth and justice will prevail. Randy touched on it a little bit this morning, where they were asking, vengeance. What does the Lord say about that? What does God tell us about it? What did you say about vengeance? Belongs to Him, right? Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will take care of it. What does that demand of each one of us?